In the mid-19th century, a child's upbringing in an Adventist family in the United States took place within a daily routine that, at first glance, was not very different from that of other rural or expanding urban Protestant families. The houses were simple, often made of wood, heated by wood-burning stoves, with few rooms shared by several family members. The day began early, guided by natural light and the tasks necessary for survival. Children woke up with the adults not out of moral imposition, but because the rhythm of the house demanded cooperation. Childhood was not understood as a phase separate from the world of work, but rather as a period of practical learning embedded in the family routine. In communities where Adventism was taking shape, such as in the regions of Michigan, New England, and parts of the Midwest, children grew up observing parents who balanced agricultural work, small trades, reading at home, and a social life marked by regular gatherings. The dining table had a central function in this environment. It was there that simple, locally produced foods were shared, as well as information about the outside world, news brought by newspapers or occasional travelers. Children learned to listen before speaking, not by written rule, but by a social habit widely disseminated in the 19th century. Early childhood education took place in multiple spaces. When there was access to public or religious schools, usually single-room classrooms, boys and girls of varying ages sat together, learning reading, writing, basic arithmetic, and notions of history. The rest of the learning came from direct observation. Girls accompanied their mothers and aunts in preparing food, sewing, and organizing the house. Boys helped their fathers, older brothers, or neighbors with manual tasks in the fields or in workshops. These distinctions, common at the time, were accepted as a natural part of preparation for adult life. Within Adventist families, special attention was paid to everyday behavior, not as an abstract ideal, but as a reflection of self-control and responsibility. Children were taught to take care of their belongings, to respect schedules, and to avoid excesses at the table. Many of these customs reflected broader 19th century debates on temperance, health, and domestic discipline, also present in other reformist groups. Adventism, still in its consolidation phase, absorbed these concerns as part of a larger cultural environment and not as an isolated system. Historical records indicate that books held a valued place in these homes. Besides the Bible, there were school textbooks, almanacs, religious periodicals, and texts on domestic health. Reading aloud at the end of the day was a common practice, allowing young children to have contact with texts even before fully mastering reading. In this context, Ellen G. White appears in the records not as a distant figure, but as an observer of family customs, describing common practices of education, food, and coexistence that she herself witnessed during travels and visits to Adventist homes. Child discipline followed 19th century patterns, emphasizing the immediate correction of behaviors considered inappropriate. However, sources indicate that many Adventist families sought a balance between firmness and care, influenced by contemporary discussions on moral education and emotional health. Physical punishment existed, as in practically all societies of the time, but there was also a growing appreciation for dialogue and the example of adults. Children learned less through formal speeches and more through the daily repetition of gestures, words, and decisions observed in the home environment. Children's free time was limited, but not non-existent. Simple games took place during work breaks or after school, often outdoors. Improvised games, short walks, and interactions with siblings and neighbors were part of childhood. These moments were not seen as separate leisure activities, but as a natural extension of family life. The modern notion of children's entertainment had not yet been consolidated, and fun arose spontaneously from social interaction. As Adventism became institutionally organized in the last decades of the 19th century, some families began to live near administrative centers, printing presses, and denominational schools. In these contexts, children were exposed to a more structured environment, where daily life included set times for study, light work, and group activities. Even so, the basic principle remained the same: to grow up observing, participating, and assuming responsibilities appropriate to their age. The emotional development of these children was deeply linked to the stability of the family and the community. Illness, loss, and economic hardship were part of the reality of the period, and childhood was not shielded from these experiences. Children learned early about fragility and perseverance, not through theoretical explanations, but through shared experience. This environment shaped individuals accustomed to simplicity and constant adaptation. By the end of the 19th century, many of these children would reach adulthood carrying with them habits, memories, and values acquired in this silent domestic context, preparing the ground for social and institutional transformations that would soon become visible. As Adventist children progressed from early childhood into the middle years of the 19th century, daily life took on more defined contours, shaped by the gradual increase in responsibilities and the social expectation of practical usefulness. Between the ages of 7 and 12, boys and girls were already seen as active participants in the household economy. This was not an exceptional imposition, but a common understanding in communities that valued work as a formative element of character. The home, the fields, and, in some cases, small workshops linked to printing or local commerce became spaces for continuous learning. In places like Battle Creek, where Adventism was beginning to establish more visible structures, the developing urban environment offered new points of reference for children. Unpaved streets, houses close to one another, and the constant flow of people involved in publishing or administrative activities created a scene distinct from rural isolation. Children observed typesetters, bookbinders, teachers, and merchants, broadening their understanding of the world beyond agriculture. Even so, the family unit remained the primary source of stability and guidance. Saturday, experienced as a special day within the week, directly influenced children's experiences. Regular activities were interrupted, and the pace of the household slowed down. For children, this meant less physical activity and more time spent at home or in community gatherings. Relative silence, reading, and moderate conversations were part of this day, not as an abstract obligation, but as a cultivated habit. Children learned to associate time with different meanings, realizing that not all days were the same. Food continued to play a central role in upbringing. Many Adventist families adopted simple diets influenced by medical and social discussions of the period. Children participated in food preparation, learning from an early age to recognize ingredients, preservation methods, and regular mealtimes. This involvement created a direct link between work, health, and well-being, concepts widely debated in the 19th century. The table remained a space for conviviality and observation, where one learned as much from what was said as from what was done. Access to formal education varied widely. Some children attended schools affiliated with the nascent church, while others continued in local public schools. In both cases, discipline was strict and the curriculum limited, reflecting the educational standards of the time. Reading and writing were considered essential skills, and individual progress was closely monitored by adults. When formal study was unavailable, parents assumed part of this role, using books, newspapers, and letters as learning materials. Preserved accounts in letters and diaries indicate that early adolescence was viewed with special attention. Physical and behavioral changes were observed cautiously, and the young person was expected to demonstrate increasing self-control. Public behavior, manner of speaking, and body posture were considered signs of maturity. Within this context, Ellen G. White recorded in her writings observations about the need for careful guidance during this phase of life, describing concrete situations experienced by families facing common challenges of the time. Community life also played an important role. Children participated in gatherings, visits to neighbors, and collective activities, learning social norms through direct interaction. Isolation was rare, and community life functioned as an extension of the family. Conflicts between children were resolved quickly, often with the mediation of nearby adults, reinforcing the idea of shared responsibility. The notion of the future began to take shape during those years. Boys were prepared to take on trades or continue the family business, while girls were guided towards managing the home according to prevailing social standards. These expectations were not presented as open choices, but as a natural continuation of life observed daily. Even so, emerging Adventism offered, in some cases, alternative paths linked to education, health, and publishing, discreetly expanding the possibilities. The hardships of the period also profoundly marked these childhoods. Epidemics, economic instability, and frequent displacements affected entire families. Children learn to cope with loss and change without much explanation, incorporating adaptation as part of life. Early maturity was a direct result of this environment, where absolute security was rare and cooperation was constant. As they approached adolescence, these children carried with them a combination of practical habits, social discipline, and community memory elements that would influence their adult choices in a religious and social movement still undergoing transformation. When they reached adolescence between the ages of 13 and 18, the children of 19th century Adventist families began to occupy a more visible and functional place in daily domestic and community life. This transition was not marked by ceremonies or formal speeches, but by the natural expansion of tasks and the progressive trust placed in them by adults. The young person was expected to act with sobriety, keep to schedules, and demonstrate decision-making ability in common situations, such as simple negotiations, caring for younger siblings, or managing limited resources. In regions where Adventism had established institutions, such as printing presses and health centers, some young people found opportunities for paid work or technical training. Contact with the religious press, in particular, introduced new routines for many of them. The constant noise of the presses, the smell of ink and paper, and the precision required in typesetting created a disciplined environment in which mistakes had immediate consequences. For these young people, work was not only a means of livelihood, but a practical school of responsibility and cooperation. Interacting with adults from different social backgrounds broadened their perception of the world. Young people learned to observe behaviors, resolve minor conflicts, and adapt to collective rules. This learning occurred without specific manuals, based on daily repetition and careful observation. Respect for hierarchy was understood as a basic element of social life, and obedience was not debated but experienced as a necessary condition for the group's functioning. In the domestic environment, expectations increased. The tasks entrusted to these young people demanded greater precision and consistency. Girls assumed broader responsibilities in organizing the household, caring for the sick and managing food. Boys were involved in practical decisions related to outside work, transporting goods and maintaining property. These roles were exercised within the cultural limits of the period, reflecting a society in which the division of roles was widely accepted. Reading continued to occupy a significant place in the lives of these young people. Newspapers, magazines, and books circulated more frequently as access to printing expanded. Reading was not seen as an isolated pastime, but as a tool for information and education. Many young people read aloud to their families or small groups, a practice that strengthened verbal fluency and text comprehension. This habit contributed to the creation of a home environment attentive to external events, even in relatively isolated communities. Letters exchanged between family and friends reveal typical concerns of this stage of life. Questions about professional future, financial stability, and starting a family appeared frequently. Marriage was considered a natural expectation for the beginning of adult life, and many young people closely observed the relationships around them as a form of learning. The choice of a spouse involved practical criteria, such as family reputation, work capacity, and public behavior. In her writings as a social observer of the period, Ellen G. White described young people engaged in intense activities, warning of the risks of overwork and neglect of health. These comments arise within a broader historical context, in which debates about fatigue, industrialization, and well-being were beginning to gain traction in the United States. These concerns reflected a society in transformation, where the pace of life was gradually accelerating. Interaction among young people was also part of daily life. Social gatherings were simple, usually held in homes, schools, or community spaces. Conversations, instrumental music, and shared reading made up these moments. Adult supervision was constant, not as rigid control, but as a silent presence. Individual reputation was considered a valuable asset, and public behavior carried significant weight in community perception. The difficulties of the period continued to profoundly influence this phase of life. Illness, workplace accidents, and economic instability directly affected individual plans. Young people learned to cope with frustrations and sudden changes, incorporating adaptation as an inevitable part of the adult experience. The notion of security was relative and predictability was limited. By the end of their youth, many of these individuals had already assumed clear social roles, whether at work, in their families, or in emerging Adventist institutions. Their childhood and adolescence, lived in an integrated way with adult life, had prepared these young people for a life marked by simplicity, discipline, and attentive observation of the world around them. This silent formation would serve as a basis for decisions that would influence not only individual trajectories but also the collective development of Adventist communities in the years to come. Upon reaching adulthood at the end of the 19th century, those who had grown up in Adventist families carried deep marks of a childhood integrated with work, constant observation, and community life. The transition to adulthood was not marked by obvious ruptures, but by continuity. Many remained close to the environment in which they had been formed, gradually assuming responsibilities previously exercised by their parents. The home of origin served as a practical model, reproduced in new houses built with limited resources, but organized according to already known habits. Marriage generally occurred in young adulthood and represented the formation of a new economic and social unit. Men and women brought to this new stage the expectations assimilated from an early age. Domestic organization, the division of tasks, and time management reflected patterns learned in childhood. The couple did not begin their life together based on abstract ideals, but on practices observed repeatedly over the years. Raising children followed the same path with discipline, moderate work, and early integration into the family routine. Many of these adults found opportunities in Adventist institutions that had become established in the last decades of the 19th century. Printing presses, schools, and health centers absorbed individuals already familiar with discipline, schedules, and cooperation. The transition from the home environment to the institutional one occurred relatively naturally, as the demands were not entirely new. Collective work, learned since childhood, facilitated adaptation to larger structures. In rural areas, others remained connected to agriculture and small trades. Life continued to be marked by natural cycles, seasons, and community events. Childhood experience, shaped by observing nature and participating in practical tasks, proved suitable for this way of life. Stability was fragile, subject to climatic and economic variations, but constant adaptation was part of the repertoire acquired from an early age. The relationship with formal education varied among these adults. Some had received limited instruction, while others had access to emerging Adventist schools. Still, reading remained a daily habit. Newspapers and books were used both for information and for instructing children. The practice of reading aloud persisted in many homes, serving as a link between generations and as a means of transmitting widely shared knowledge and social values. Community life remained central. Visits, gatherings, and collective activities reinforced bonds built over decades. Individual reputation, formed since childhood, accompanied the adult in their social relationships. Behaviors were remembered. Stories shared and accumulated experiences served as a reference for younger generations. The community functioned as a living memory, in which the recent past influenced present decisions. The difficulties faced in childhood and youth continued to exert influence. Those who had grown up dealing with loss, illness, and change demonstrated greater tolerance for uncertainty. Resilience was not the result of formal teaching, but of prolonged exposure to harsh realities. Life expectancy was still limited, and awareness of human fragility was part of adult daily life. As a chronicler of her time, Ellen G. White recorded impressions of families formed by individuals she had known since childhood. Her writings describe adults who reproduced patterns learned decades earlier, confirming the power of the home environment in shaping character. These records, when read today, offer a consistent portrait of social continuity rather than rupture. By the end of the 19th century, the generation that had grown up in Adventist homes had fully integrated into the transforming American society. Industrialization was advancing, cities were growing, and new ideas were circulating more rapidly. Even so, many of these adults maintained habits shaped by a simple childhood, marked by daily work, attentive observation, and constant interaction. These elements, acquired without formal discourse or elaborate pedagogical systems, would continue to influence the formation of subsequent generations, establishing a historical thread that would run through the beginning of the new century. Childhood in 19th century Adventist families was not built upon formal discourses or explicit pedagogical projects, but rather upon a consistently repeated daily routine. Children grew up observing adults, participating in domestic chores, learning social boundaries, and gradually assimilating responsibilities. This model, common in American society at the time, found in Adventism an environment that valued discipline, simplicity, and community life without distancing itself from the broader cultural context. Upon reaching adulthood, these individuals carried habits shaped by this silent experience, transmitting them to subsequent generations, and contributing to the social continuity of a movement still in formation within a rapidly transforming historical country.